Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox backing in with Matt Kelly for another episode of the award-winning and number one in Malta podcast, Compliance Into the Weeds. Welcome back, Matt.
Hello, Tom. Good to be here.
Did you know you were a thing in Malta?
Actually, have we not been in the top in Malta before? I don't know if we have to go on the road to, what is the capital city there? Valletta, I think. Maybe we should do a live podcast from there.
The Maltese podcast.
We'll work on it.
All right. Matt, I'm not quite sure how to characterize today's story. Is it fraud? Is it compliance? Is it negligence? Or maybe even just greed? But with those questions popping around in our listener's head, why don't you lay it out?
It's a good question what this is, because for listeners, I want to talk about the threat around security and privacy audits, thanks to AI-driven automation, which may be opening the door to weakening the audits that companies get, either to demonstrate their own cybersecurity bona fides, or that you, big company, rely on when you want to work with a vendor who is trying to demonstrate that it is strong cybersecurity. And of course, there are audits for that. And now suddenly issues are arising this spring about how trustworthy these audits are. The specific thing that lit the fuse here was a story that broke probably about 10 or 14 days ago for a tech startup known as Delve. Now, Delve claims that it can relieve the burden of cybersecurity and privacy audits that companies will get. These are SOC audits, SOC. Don't ask me what SOC stands for. I think service organization companies or something, but SOC audits. You can get a SOC 1 audit that looks at a vendor's financial reporting controls in case they are maybe running your outsourced payroll function. You can get a SOC 2 audit that looks at the vendor's cybersecurity controls in case you are entrusting it with employee data, customer data, contract information, or that vendor is running your cybersecurity or something like that. Think about how often large companies now rely on vendors to do services. And you need some way to make sure that those vendors you want to use are reliable with their cybersecurity and their privacy controls. So you have them get a SOC audit, SOC 1, SOC 2, we can talk about that. Back to Delve, this technology startup, which claims that it is able to automate a lot of that audit process. Well, not long ago, a whistleblower, an alleged whistleblower, a self-professed whistleblower, claims to have evidence that Delve is making this stuff up, that Delve is using AI to generate what looks like audit documentation. They then have an audit firm rubber stamp that, and you get your SOC audit, which is not worth a damn thing. Now, to be clear, Delve denies this. And the whistleblower does make very compelling arguments and has a lot of evidence, allegedly, suggesting that, yes, Delve is engaged in some sort of fraud or duplicity. Delve is saying, no, that's not true. But we don't know who this whistleblower is. They only go by the online handle Deep Delve or Deep Delver. But Deep Delver has claims that somebody leaked him all of this evidence that Delve is fabricating audit results. That alone calls into question the authenticity or reliability of hundreds of SOC audits that Delve has helped to produce. But Tom, I think there's a larger question here that technology startups are trying to break down the whole audit process for SOC 1 and 2 audits. And we have to wonder if SOC 1 and 2 audits, which are important for cybersecurity risk, are they going to be worth the paper they're printed on, or the electrons that they have for your emailed documentation or whatever? But maybe the value and reliability of these SOC audits is being called into question, and that is a big deal. So we have this specific issue with Delve where there's whiffs of fraud and stinky stuff, but there's a larger issue that the whole mechanism for SOC audits might be unraveling, and that's a big problem.
So, Matt, I've been thinking about this matter since you raised it as our topic today. And initially, I thought something along the lines of people are buying cheap audit results. So what else is new? if you use a non-standard accounting firm to do your accounting work, or if you use a law firm that doesn't play in the anti-corruption space to do your anti-corruption audit, that's a red flag. But here I would add, in addition to the Delve part, really there's another part that is as troubling to me, which is the accounting firms. And the whistleblower reported that there were two accounting firms that Delve referred clients to. If I can pick up their names, Corp and Gradient. Frankly, I was not familiar with either of those, but they operate primarily in India with only a nominal presence in the United States. And as part of the research you suggested for this um, podcast, is reported in the Journal of Accountancy, Andrew Kinney reporting or writing about this issue, that many of the firms or companies are using these firms that are not US based accounting firms. And that is a clear red flag and equally troubling in addition to the Delve part of it. So I really see this as two parts. And the concern you raise, certainly about SOC 2, which is one of the most rigorous audits that I'm aware of, and one of the most important to satisfy data privacy and data protection concerns. And so now, if I'm Tom Fox Energy and I give you my SOC 2, how much due diligence do you have to do on not only my SOC 2 report, but the technology service provider that helped me with it and the accounting firm that stamped audit approved on it?
That is all very valid to raise. And it points to this larger issue that the economic model of how SOC 2 audits or SOC 1 audits, SOC audits, how SOC audits are performed and done. SOC audits are expensive and they take a long time. And now we have this next generation of online startups who are claiming that they are breaking down that model for cheapness. However, are we going to see a rush to low quality, low cost audits? Let's take a step back for all the listeners and explain how a SOC audit would traditionally work. Is that you, vendor, would commission an AI CPA registered certified public accounting firm to do the audit. And that audit firm would gather evidence from the client. That would be painstaking. It would be a long time. It would be expensive. And you would be taking screenshots or sending Excel files or all this other stuff to the audit firm, which would look at all of that. It would review it. It would test the controls. And then the firm would issue a report and attest to the design of the controls. It would maybe attest to how well the controls work. This would, at best, take 4 or 5 months, probably longer. At best, cost $50,000. Probably more, but you would get a AI CPA blessed SOC report, and that would be trustworthy to other customers of yours who want to know if they can trust your cybersecurity. Now we enter the Delve and the startup era. They're using AI to say, we'll generate all of this audit evidence automatically. We'll pull it from your files, and we, the tech tool, will then give all of that to an audit firm that will look at it, review it, bang, there's your audit firm. And instead of taking 6 months, it'll take 5 days. And instead of it costing 60 grand, it'll cost $5,000. These are actual prices and times I have heard from SOC auditors who are very alarmed at all of this. So if you're a vendor looking for a quick and dirty SOC report, you could go that route where they have split the evidence gathering and the audit review and attestation into two. And the cheap and quick tech tool using AI is what's driving down the cost. And then they pair up with an audit firm that says, yeah, looks great, stamp, and here's your SOC audit. You are right that the accusations of Delve, they involve overseas audit firms. Who are these firms? We don't really know. Can you trust them? Who knows? But then you wind up with this SOC 2 report that looks really cool. Let's remember, in the AI age, everything looks really cool and convincing. That doesn't mean that it's good. And this is the beef that a lot of audit firms in the United States have, Sure, they have a commercial interest in raising this point because they're getting really squeezed on their work. But they are not wrong to say that these SOC audits are no longer going to be reliable. They'll just be cheap, quick, easy window dressing. And how does that help a company where look at every single survey of what are the board's top risk worries? It's always cybersecurity. It's always vendor security. It's always the supply chain. SOC audits are meant to try and provide some assurance over all of that. And if we're going to fracture the economic model of it to something that is quick and easy, you're not going to get a lot of assurance from those SOC audits, and you still have those risks. If somebody goes this route for a quick and dirty SOC 2 audit, and you're a healthcare company and your vendor winds up with a HIPAA violation, guess what? You're still on the hook for the HIPAA violation. And so what was the point of that whole SOC audit exercise? These are valid concerns to raise. Regulators are nowhere on thinking about these issues and Delve, because of the fraud allegations, which may or may not be true, but Delve really puts an ugly, urgent point on it. But even if Delve didn't exist at all and this issue was not there, the broader question of the economics of SOC audits unraveling, that's true. That's valid. That is a big concern that companies need to think about.
I want to make sure people completely understand it, or not completely understand, because our listeners, as those in Malta will tell us, understand compliance in the weeds. But these are really two parts. The technology part and deep delver criticize the pre-population of the forms much uniformly. So that's a level of, whether that's indicia of red flags or whether that's a level of fraud. Delve's response is, we just pre-populated it with some answers. It's up to the user and or their attestating accounting firm to sign off on that. And so now you have to look and take a deep dive into the actual attestation. And from there, I guess you have to inquire into the actual audit itself. And that's a level of review and security that gives you no comfort from a SOC to attestation.
That is all true. And I would humbly submit that if you get a SOC audit and you have to go and investigate the accuracy of it, what was the point of the SOC audit in the first place? You, big company, are just going to have to go and reperform an assessment of your vendor's cybersecurity controls. Then the SOC audit that vendor has is not worth a tinker's damn. But here's how it happens. So let's say, Tom, that you are the tech startup that's offering outsourced payroll services. You need a SOC audit to win over me, big company that is looking to outsource my payroll function. So you need to find a SOC audit. So you Google, how do I get a SOC audit really fast? And these businesses, for lack of a better word, they have rigged up their search engine optimization. So they're the first results. And if they're saying, we'll get you your SOC audit in 10 days for $5,000, or you could call up a local accounting firm that will say it'll take 6 months and it's going to have a staff of 10 and it's going to cost you 50 grand. You, vendor, you're going to say, I don't have enough money for that. I'm going to go with the quick and dirty thing. And then I, big company looking to outsource my payroll, I'm looking at you and I'm wondering, the SOC audit that you have emblazoned on your website, is that worth anything to me? Does it provide me any assurance? My board is still breathing down my neck about cybersecurity in our vendors. And how am I going to figure that out? Before it became so easy to fracture the evidence gathering from the review and attestation, it would have been really hard to do the cheap and easy thing. But now AI is allowing cheap on cost. And I fear a lot of companies are going to default to cheap on quality as well. Like it's good enough for now and it's really cheap. So let's just go that route, because then we get the SOC audit we need to please the big client. That is a check the box mentality. That is literally what check the box is. It's cheap, but we need it. And is it good enough to meet our needs? Yeah. But there's no actual quality behind that audit. And so it doesn't really provide enough assurance that you would want to pass along to me, the big corporation. We don't have a good answer for this right now. This is not healthy. This is not good. However, this is not regulated. The Public Company Accounting Oversight Board they're not going to get involved in this. Securities and Exchange Commission isn't going to get involved in this because they're going to say it's not about financial reporting. But it's still about something really important. And we don't have a lot of regulations about the reliability of cybersecurity controls. So we have this brewing market failure where SOC audits for vendors are not going to be reliable. The audit firms that are reputable are very alarmed about this. The AICPA is trying to figure out how to address it. But in the end, that's a private organization. It doesn't have the force of law behind it. So there are a lot of concerns that this is going to be the sort of a termites underneath the foundation of assurance, and eventually the foundation is going to rot away.
Matt, as a lawyer, I'm certainly familiar with the rules of every state bar in the United States, which require a license to practice law in the state. So I have a license to practice law in the state of Texas. Do accounting firms, somehow from my Enron experience, I remember accounting firms have a similar rule about being required, I think, to perform accounting services in the state. Could there be any investigation or something there if these are truly Indian accounting firms with limited U.S. presence turning out stamped attestations?
There are some abilities to get to this. So state accounting boards typically will be regulating the individual accountant and your CPA license. Could they take action against a CPA firm? Occasionally, but typically not. And this is such a new idea that I'm willing to bet there isn't a state accounting board in the whole country that's actually thought much about this. Occasionally, I can think of one instance in particular several years ago. There was an example of an audit firm that was really just an audit mill, rubber stamping financial statement audits. And the PCAOB did swoop in and bar that audit firm from auditing public companies. That was a big, huge hassle for the public companies, one of which was Trump Media, by the way, fun fact. That was financial statement audits. And this is cybersecurity and assurance services for non-financial issues. First off, the PCAOB is currently a mess. It's had a big budget cut. The SEC is still, I think, trying to figure out what it wants to do with the PCAOB and perhaps get the PCAOB into its clutches somehow. But if you look at current SEC leadership, they also are a mess that has cut huge numbers of their staff. Their enforcement division chief just resigned. Nobody is actually going to look at this, I don't think, because it is foremost not about financial statement reliability. And a lot of these businesses, by the way, they're not public companies. So a lot of the regulators are going to say, how is this a securities issue? It's not. It's a cybersecurity assurance issue, which is the precursor, I would argue, to strong financial reporting and strong investor trust. This is like step 1 or 2 when the SEC and PCAOB are worried about steps 9 and 10. The states are not anywhere on this. I personally, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd love to have some sort of requirement of effective internal security controls, like effective financial controls. This administration is not going to do that, but the need for strong cybersecurity assurance is enormous. And what is happening at Delve and with other firms is clearly showing that these AI-driven and innovative business models, they're fracturing the economic model behind getting good, reliable SOC audits. So you're going to have a lot of cheap and easy SOC audits that may or may not be reliable. And the question for senior companies getting these audits is, do you want a good quality audit that is expensive and takes time and costs money, but it will be a good gesture of trust to your customers? Do you want that? Or do you want the thing that comes up at the top of the Google results that says SOC audits in 6 days cost $5,000? Because that is good enough for what we need right now. And there's a lot of companies that aren't going to be that cynical, and AI is going to make that judgment easier to do. It's still wrong, but it's going to be easier to get there. And that is literally a check the box mentality as opposed to quality. What are we doing here, folks? It is a big simmering problem that we need to talk more about.
Matt, the only thing I could think to say is to quote Sergeant Phil Esterhaus from Hill Street Blues, let's be careful out there.
Indeed.